This video, we're going to make another custom component. It's going to be a number pad. We're going to do it a little bit differently. We're going to use JavaScript and we're going to dynamically create these buttons. This is going to be another end-to-end video, so you're going to see every mistake. You may hear me get a little frustrated with this. You may hear dogs barking, airplanes, thunder, lightning, catastrophes. You may actually hear me rip the keyboard right out of this computer and throw it across the room, because this may be a little bit frustrating. Anyways, hopefully none of that will happen. Let's dive in here and figure this out. First things first, I'm going to right click, add new, and let's go with a cute quick file. And let's call this number pad. Jump in here and I want to import some controls. So I'm going to say cute quick. Like I said, my keyboard's not helping me out today. Dot controls. You ever just have that feeling where you're just like, you know what? I think it's time for a new mouse and keyboard. I think we're getting to that point. This thing's pretty beat up. I'm not violent with my equipment. It's just they're old. So we're going to say signal, clicked, and we want to be able to pass a value. So I'm going to say int value. And yes, when we do signal, it is exactly what it sounds like. This could be a Qt core signal that we use in a signal and slot. Remember, on the back end, Qt's going to translate everything QML does into a Qt property which uses signals and slots. So very, very cool that it works that way. All right, now that we've got that, let's go ahead and do a column. And let's call this ID COL. Whoopsie, there we go. And let's go ahead and in here, let's add a grid. There is a method to my madness. Bear with me. ID, and this grid is where we're going to pop into a lot of buttons and just say add them all into the grid. But the column, we actually want to put one at the very end here. So let's go ahead and make our grid. Sometimes IntelliSense gets a little frustrating here. Spacing 5 rows. Let's go ahead and add in, we want an actual number pad here. So we're going to have 4 rows by 3 columns. All right, once we've got that in there, we're going to make a function here. This is where we actually click the button. I'm going to say function, do clicked, value, and we're going to say console.log, and we want to just print that value out. But at the same time, we want to be able to call or emit our signal. So I want to say clicked value. There we go. Premise being, when we click one of the buttons that we're going to generate, it's going to call this do clicked, and it's going to just emit that signal, log into a console so we can see what's going on under the hood. Now comes the fun bit. As promised, we're going to dynamically generate these buttons. I'm going to say component dot onCompleted, and I'm going to say console.log just so I can see what's going on. This will help us out later in debug land if we have a big problem. And I want to say var num. Let's go ahead and say 0. And we want for var I equals 0, I is less than 10, and I plus plus. Now, if you're wondering where I'm getting these numbers from, look down at your keyboard, and if you're lucky enough to have a number pad, you're going to see 7, 8, 9, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, and 0. So those are 10 buttons that we're going to add. And we're going to say our first row, and these are the actual numbers here. So we're going to say if I equals 0, then the number we're actually printing is going to be 7. You may be going, huh, what? What are we doing here? So let's actually get this. If you look down at your number pad, it doesn't start, if you start on the top left, it doesn't start with 0 or 1, it starts with 7. So we're saying go through all 10 of these numbers, that first number, 0, is going to start at 7. And then we want the second row. So if that number is 3, because we've gone up 3 numbers, then the actual number we want to display is 4. If you look at your number pad, the second or middle row starts with a 4. And that may not be true for keyboards overseas. I didn't even think about that when I started this. I'm using a standard American keyboard, but I'm fairly certain most keyboards across the world are pretty much the same. Third row is going to start with a 6, and its actual number would be 1. If the number is 9, which is pretty much going to be the last number in there, then we're going to say the actual number is 0, and that is the bottom row. So now that we've done a bit of translating, this is where the really crazy part comes in. So we're going to dynamically generate this button. We're going to say var btn equal, and we want qt.create QML object. And the syntax for this is wildly debatable. I hate to say that, but it really truly is. So the first thing we want to do is we want to make some sort of string. And I'm going to say, we have to, this is frustrating because if you read the documentation, you actually have to import as if this was a separate QML file altogether. And a lot of the documentation is going to tell you, make a QML file and then import that file. The problem is with controls is, you guessed it, those are QML files you don't readily have access to. So you've got to actually write all this out. So I'm going to say Qt quick 2.0. And then we want to import, and if you're wondering where I'm getting all this from, it's just right up here. We can actually just copy this, paste it. So we're importing QQuick 2.0 and QQuick Controls 2.3. Again, use the version that's appropriate for you. Make sure, because this is all on one line, you have these semicolons. And then we want to actually make our button. So we're going to say button. And this is exactly as if we were doing something like this. We're just going to do it down here in a string. And we could, if we really, really wanted to, we could actually do it down here. And we could say ID and then btn. That way we have the basic syntax. I'm going to cut that, paste it right in here. And we're going to start wrapping around because this is a bit long. Now, because we have multiple buttons and we have to have a unique identifier, at this point we actually have to say something like this. I. So what we're doing is we're dynamically generating the ID for the dynamically generated button. Now, and I may actually just drop this down a line so we can see what's going on. So we're importing, generating the button, generating the ID for the button. Now we want to call the onClicked. And we're going to call our function doClicked right up here. So I'm going to copy that, paste that. We have our parentheses, and honestly, I don't like the way this works. I'm just going to level with you. It seems kind of clumsy and cumbersome, and it just can get a little frustrating. So we're going to say plus plus. That way it converts it back to a string. And this is going to be our number that we're dynamically generating here. So that's the value we're going to shove into that doClicked function up here. All right. Now that we have all of that giant string, we need to give it a parent. The parent is going to be that grid, and we need to give it some sort of identifier. The documentation for all of this is a little bit confusing, and the end result is this giant line, which is very confusing to understand, but let's go through it super quick. We are creating a button using Qt create QML object, which takes a string, and that string is just QML code. This is basically what the QML engine in C++ land is actually doing. It's saying, hey, engine, load this document as a string. That's essentially what we're doing. There's a lot more to it, but you get the basics. And then we're saying, hey, create an identifier and then hook into this onClicked. I should say connect to the onClick using signals and slots. Set the parent, and then we need some sort of value telling Qt, hey, this is what we're trying to do. This I don't really fully understand. I'm just going to level with you. I've read the documentation about 100,000 times, and I just don't get why that's even needed half the time. I may deep dive into the documentation and cover that a little more in depth, but just for now, this is just some voodoo magic number. You can put pretty much whatever you want in here. I put dynamically loaded just so I could tell what was going on under the hood. All right, now that we've got all of that, we can actually work with this button. So I'm going to say btn dot, and IntelliSense is 100% not going to help us here. Text equals the num, the btn dot width, and I'm just going to say 40, btn dot height equals 40, and we want to increment that number. Now remember, we're starting with 0, but then we're doing some sort of translation here. So if I is 0, number is going to be 7, first row, second row, third row, bottom row. Whew. All right, that is just nuts. But we have an issue. We want to put that 0 button on the very bottom. So we're going to set the last button on the bottom. So I'm going to say var obj for object equals grid children, and we're going to grab that last child. I'm going to say grid dot children dot length -1. So really all we're doing is we're going out to this grid. Where are you? Right here. And we're saying get all the children, because we have a parent-child relationship, get all the children, but get the last child in that array. It's technically not an array, it's a Q vector under the hood. And we're going to say obj.parent equals COL, meaning we're going to actually take that object and switch it from the grid, this guy, and we're going to bump it up a notch to this column. So effectively, we're adding a button here. We're saying button, and that's going to be our 0 button. So it'll be underneath that grid. Very, very cool the way that works. Very flexible. Now, once we get that, we want to actually modify that button's length because we want it to take up that whole bottom row. So we're going to say width equals, and then I'm going to do a little bit of math here, 40 times grid.col, and then let's add 10 to there just for good measure. That way it looks nice and pretty. Whew, okay, that is much more complex than what we've been doing. Let's look at this real quick here. So we've got our item, ID of root, we've got a signal that we're going to emit, we have a column that has a grid, and we're going to dynamically, on the component onComplete, generate these buttons using the Qt create QML object, which is a big ugly string followed by a parent and then some sort of identifier telling us what we did, modifying those buttons. Then we're going to grab that last button, that 0 button, and I misspelled that. Thank you, IntelliSense. All right. That would have ended badly. Anyways, we're going to grab that last button and we're going to pull him out of the grid and put him under the grid into the column and then resize it. Wow, that is, for a beginner's tutorial, I think we got our money's worth out of this. Let's actually jump over to design view. Let's see what this looks like. I'm going to import some controls just because I feel like it. I want a column, drag drop. Maybe. There we go. Let's go ahead and push this into the layout. I want to actually scale that down just a smidge. I want a label. Drag drop. There's our label. Thank you. Sometimes that editor just drives me nuts when it does that. All right, so we're going to say bang, and let's make this 25. And let's do some spacing on this thing. I need to space this out a little bit better. 25. All right, let's clear that, and we're going to take our number pad that we just generated, drag and drop, and voila. Our number pad does not have a width and a height, so we have to look at this a little better. Let's say 100 by 100. It's not going to really display too well because, well, you guessed it, we haven't generated those little buttons yet. That's going to be generated at runtime. So let's go ahead and actually center this bad boy. And I'm going to save, flip over here, and I'm going to say onClicked. And we want to say LBL, we want to grab this label up here. .text, and this is going to equal that value. In case you're wondering where I'm getting the value from, it is right here, the signature of our signal. Save and run. Let's see what this looks like. Uh-oh, we got some boo-boos here. So we're not generating a number pad. Let's figure out what's going on. Creating button, error in Qt create QML object, failed to create expected token. Ah, man. And it's not going to help us out here. So let's figure out where we're missing something. So it's expecting a token. Well, we've got import button. And let me take a look at this thing. I see it. It's actually right here. Boom. That little, let me go back here so you can see what I'm talking about. After the ID, I didn't have that in there, so it was actually treating that as one giant line. Remember, that actually denotes it's a new line. Save and run. Now, ta-da, it magically works. Creating button, and we can click. We have our dynamically generated buttons, and life is good. Just to recap, we are dynamically generating these buttons. We are hooking into signals and slots, and we can actually do some really cool things once we start integrating JavaScript into our applications.